the requirement of Vega, but now it becomes real.
The real thing. Avum carrying 626 kilos of propellant in her 4 tanks, powered by a restartable engine, as we mentioned, and we're going to have 5 burns on this flight. What do we need 5 burns for?
Yes, so the 2 first burns are necessary to target the 820 kilometers of the circular orbit of Proba-V. You know, the following 2 are for the benefit of the orbit at 670 kilometers of VNREDSat and ESTCube. Then after, we have the 5th and last one, which is necessary to deorbit the Avum following a safe and predetermined trajectory over the Pacific Ocean. The space debris mitigation is one of the very important innovations of this launch.
I think on the first Vega launch, lasted just over an hour. Tonight's will be over 2 hours. And the Avum, at that time, we had 3 burns, and so now we have 5.
Correct, yes.
There are other differences, which we'll get to in a moment. But for the moment, we are in the middle of the first Avum burn, which will burn again for about another 30 seconds. Then we'll have a ballistics phase, coasting phase, which will last about 3/4 of an hour. Then the Avum will reignite for the second burn. It lasts about a minute and a half. They're short burns and they're long burns.
Yeah.
Shortly after that, Proba-V will be separated at about plus 55 minutes and 26 seconds. Then there'll be a third Avum burn, and a 4th Avum firing will prepare the separation of VNREDSat and ESTCube. If you're looking ahead, VNREDSat separating at 1 minute and 57 minutes after launch, and ESTCube-1 released about 3 minutes after that. Coming up on the end of the first Avum burn, should hear the DDO. There we go. She's called out the first flame-out extinction of the upper stage. And you see our speed on the lower left is 7.96 kilometers per second. I think that's going to be about our top speed, because we're going to be changing speeds now.
Exactly.
Let's go back down to Earth for a moment. Enrico, talk about the launch pad, if you don't mind. Vega's pad was built on the old Ariane-1 pad called ELA-1, which was decommissioned in 1989. But its history goes back even farther.
Yeah, even before Ariane, the initial launch pad, that launch pad was built for the 3 stages launcher Europa in the beginning of the 70s. Europa was the first European collaboration in a launcher sector and the precursor of the current Ariane launchers family. That adventure gave birth to ESA.
More of the mission in a moment, but for now, as promised, the second part of the latest news from Arianespace, including a lot of contracts. Take a look. On February 7th, Arianespace launched successfully for the 54th straight time, lifting into orbit 2 new telecom satellites, Amazonas 3 for Spain and Arianespace Africa-Sat-1A, the first satellite for Azerbaijan. The mission set a record for mass delivered on geostationary transfer orbit, 9.5 tons.
Eutelsat and Arianespace announced the signature of a new contract for launch of several satellites on February 8th. The agreement guaranteed Eutelsat new resources and flexibility in order to carry out a program to expand and grow its satellite fleet.
In Sydney on March 4th, with French and Australian ministers looking on, Arianespace signed a new launch contract for the new Australian operator NBN. The 6-ton satellite will be launched in 2015 on an Ariane 5.
On March 18, Intelsat chose Arianespace for the launch of 3 new telecom satellites in the 6-ton range. The signatures brought to 54 the total number of contracts signed between Arianespace and Intelsat over the years.
France's Minister of the Interior, Manuel Valls, paid a visit to French Guiana on March 8th. He toured the Guiana Space Center facilities along with representatives of Europe's space industries. At the end of his visit, he congratulated the CSG teams, saying he was quite impressed by what he saw.
Arianespace was present at Satellite 2013, one of the big conferences for members of the global space community, which took place in Washington, D.C. from March 19 to 21.
For its 20th birthday on April 12th, Japanese operator BSAT awarded Arianespace its Certificate of Appreciation for the company's launch services and solutions.
3 missions are being graded in French Guiana right now. The next Ariane 5 launch is just a few short weeks away. Flight 213 will lift the fourth automated transfer vehicle, or ATV, called the Albert Einstein, to the International Space Station, bringing food and supplies to the astronauts on board.
The fifth Soyuz flight from French Guiana is set for late June. It will carry the first 4 satellites in the O3b constellation. This fleet will provide internet access to those living in regions where no online service is yet available.
Preparation for Ariane Flight 214 got underway here on April 24. The mission, set for the end of July, will place in orbit 2 new telecom satellites, AlphaSat for Inmarsat and INSAT-3D for ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization.
Enrico, our satellites are going into SSO, Sun Synchronous Orbit. What's that all about?
Yes, tonight Vega will release our 3 clients on 2 different SSO orbits. As I said before, 820 and 670 kilometers, different altitude and different inclination. Typically, Earth observation satellites are on Sun synchronous orbit. It's an orbit which combines altitude and inclination in such a way that satellites fly from a pole to the other, crossing the equator 12 times a day, each pass at the same local solar time. For Proba-V it will be at 10:45 a.m. and VNREDSat at 10:41 a.m. In such an orbit, satellites are in a constant sunlight, and it's very useful for imaging satellites because shadow will be nearly the same on every pass.
We mentioned Jean-Yves Le Gall has moved from Arianespace to CNES, the French Space Agency. An interview now with Mr. Le Gall.
Hello, so here we are today for the second launch of Vega, the small launcher of Europe. Not that small, actually. And the CNES, as you know, has been a major stakeholder in the development of Vega because the first stage of Vega, P80, was co-developed by the launcher department of CNES. And after the first huge success of the first Vega launch last year, we are now moving forward a new step in the development and implementation of Vega. As far as we're concerned, it's actually the first that will take place since my appointment on April the 3rd as president of CNES. So it's a new step which we are all taking together, and I'm of course very, very happy to be here today for this first launch.
We mentioned that the mission of the first Vega launch was to qualify the overall Vega system, including the vehicle, the ground infrastructure from the launch campaign to payload separation, all the way through to the disposal of the upper AVUM module that demonstrated the correct behavior of all the elements for the launch system in real conditions. You can't do that except in real conditions. But we're still demonstrating certain elements tonight, in particular the VESPA system.
Totally correct, yes. VESPA means Vega Secondary Adapter Payload. It is in order to improve the customer service. New payload configurations are qualified so. This evening, the VESPA structure. This VESPA structure will extend the Vega payload launch capabilities for multiple payloads. Vega will be better tailored for its specific market of mini-satellites.
Very good. Up next, you'll see how Vega can orbit her different payloads, and we'll be back with more of the mission afterward.
After its successful qualification flight on the 13th of February 2012, Vega is on the launch pad ready for its second mission. This time Vega will show its full potential with 3 different payloads: ESA's Proba-V, the Estonian CubeSat, and a satellite for the Vietnam Academy of Science. This delivery is possible thanks to a new multi-payload system called VESPA.
When you will have this stack integrated, on top you have the Proba satellite. The Proba satellite will be the first one to separate during flight with its separation mechanism. Then the upper part of this VESPA structure will separate and then allowing to then perform the separation of the secondary payload, the VNREDSat, which is placed inside the lower part behind you.
The flight will be completed with the separation of the small CubeSat. This launch is also the first of a series entitled VERTA, for Vega Research and Technology Accompaniment, aimed at the smooth introduction of the launcher to commercial service. 5 launches are planned for this transition phase between ESA, the developer, and Arianespace, which runs Europe's launches. This second flight will confirm Vega's capacity to send multiple payloads, as well as Europe's guaranteed access to space. Now with Vega, Soyuz and Ariane, Arianespace is able to launch any satellite into any orbit from Kourou.
Enrico, they mentioned VERTA, V-E-R-T-A, in the film, also being qualified tonight. What's the VERTA program?
Yes, as they said, it means Vega Research and Technology Accompaniment. It aims to demonstrate the flexibility of the Vega launcher. For example, the flight program software is new. Its implementation and flexibility for the different possible missions of the launcher are today improved. It also comprises a production accompaniment. The introduction of Vega for commercial exploitation in a cost-effective way is smooth.
There are 5 more Vegas ordered under the VERTA program. I think that was mentioned. They're currently in production. The flights make up a program to support the initial operations of the early Vega launch system. VERTA was approved by ESA in 2005, and the payloads have been pretty much designated for most of the flights, haven't they? The next one is in July of next year?
Yeah, then after in 2015.
A film up next now on the VERTA program. You'll find out more about ESA's VERTA activities.
On the 13th of February 2012, ESA, the European Space Agency, launched the very first Vega rocket into space, a successful qualification flight. Now the second Vega is on its launch pad, protected by its preparation tower in Kourou. This will be the first of 5 demonstration flights, part of a program called VERTA, for Vega Research Technology and Accompaniment, to support and secure the initial operations of the Vega launch system. The aim is to allow a smooth introduction of Vega for its commercial use and exploitation by Arianespace.
The VERTA phase is an initial exploitation accompaniment phase, which is necessary in order to, let's say, to accompany the actual commercial exploitation in the early phase of the development of a launch system. This allows to lower down the cost, so to make the launch service more appealing, and to improve the customer service. In this first VERTA launch, we introduced improvements in the launch service, the main one, the most visible one, being the multi-payload capability of the launcher.
Here in Kourou's clean room, the upper part of Vega is being readied for launch. This multi-payload relies on a specially developed adapter for Vega. It allows Vega to be used to its full potential by lifting several payloads simultaneously into orbit. This second Vega will carry 3 satellites, Proba-V, the Vietnamese VNREDSat, and an Estonian CubeSat.
So this is an important qualification for Vega because it'll extend the single launch capacity to a multiple launch capacity, meaning as for Ariane 5, we will be able to have 2 normal paying customers in addition to the CubeSats, as we have done for the first flight and as we have for this flight, if we need to.
The Vega launcher comprises 3 solid propulsion stages with a 4th stage ARVM, with liquid propellant and a reignitable engine. It can be fired up to 5 times in space, delivering the satellites not only to different orbits but also in different inclinations, a key asset for Vega's commercial operation. That is why Vega represents an important introduction to the European launcher market and guides the way for ESA's future launcher development.
In ESA we look ahead for all the family of launchers, and that's the reason why we are conceiving Ariane 6. Ariane 6 is the launch vehicle that we shall need in the future to stay on the market in a fully competitive way, so that the customers can be launched when they really need and at the cost that is competitive. So this is the challenge of Ariane 6.
ESA wants to ensure that Vega becomes a reliable, low-cost launcher for small satellites. This second Vega flight marks the handover from ESA to Arianespace. It also marks the evolution of future launches, particularly Ariane 6, approved by ESA member states at the Napoli Ministerial Conference last November and confirming Europe's continuing independent access to space. Vega's career is only starting. But with Vega, Soyuz and Ariane at Kourou, Europe can now launch any satellite on any orbit.
They mentioned Ariane 6 twice in that film.